New blood. The small bachelor pack of Vargin had been in INKARNATE just for over a week now. They had caught wind of Niland, the old alpha female's brother and trio, still living in this country, though they were having no luck finding them. The name was familiar to a few people, but all that they talked to seemed uneasy with sharing any more information with other Vargin. Not that they could blame them. They probably heard about the unrest in Vargin communities and wanted nothing to do with it, especially unfamiliars. Baylan looked down the familiar street from the bench he sat on. He remembered walking down this street with Matsi, Trinskal, and the late Queen. Seemed like a lifetime ago, and really, it was. He was no longer the same advisor, or same Vargin for that matter. Moki, the youngest of their small pack, flopped onto the bench next to Baylan, a bag of chips in his hands. Bay's attention pulled back to the youngster, and he gently reached up and pat his head. Makoto huffed slightly as he leaned away from Bay, but continued to shove chips into his mouth. "Don't fill up on those, Moki," Bay said softly, as his eyes shifted, looking for the rest of their pack. He quickly found Lunsen, stretched out in the grass just a few paces from where he sat. "Loon," Bay said as he stood up. Moki glanced at him, quiet and observing, then at the lazy male in the grass. "Where's Tay and Say?" the eldest male asked as he walked closer to the lazy one. Loon's arms went into the air in a questioning manner, though he never opened his eyes or changed expression. Baylan sighed, turned around, looking for the brothers. "I thought you always knew where Taylin was," Bay muttered as he looked back down at Loon. The dark-haired Vargin had one arm over his face, with the other over his head. Bay lightly tapped him on the side with his foot. Loon let out a groan, but didn't move. "Baylan, Baylan, Baylan, Baylan!" Baylan about jumped out of his skin at the sudden screeching of his name. He turned around to see both Taylin and RSA running towards him with bright and ecstatic looks on their faces. Despite their excited looks, Baylan went in the defensive. What happened? Are you two all right?" he asked as he stepped towards the brothers, grabbing Say and looking him over like a worried mother. Say lightly shoved Baylan off of him and growled. "Stop it!" he huffed. As Baylan fussed over the brothers, Loon sat up from his napping spot, and Moki bounded over to join in the excitement. "Listen," Tay said happily, almost bouncing with his excitement. "We ran into a few men that carried the scent of our kind on them." Taylon's bi-colored eyes were bright and wide, and he grabbed RSA's shoulders in an uncontrollable excitement. "So, we followed them," Say laughed out. Bay let out a groan, but Say waved at him to shut up. "They travel back to another world called Fayley. So, we looked into it." Say reached over, tapping his brother on the chest with the back of his hand. "Fayley is an island country led by... Get this!" Talon leaned forward with a little smirk. "A Siegfried Lionheart." Baylan's face fell. "Isn't that the former High Alphys's brother's name?" Loon asked as he walked over and joined them. "Loon, you lived with the Valley Pack," Say said with a slight stink glare. Loon only shrugged and wrinkled his nose, but looked at Bay for an answer. "Yeah, he was her adopted brother. Solera banished him just before the advisors were banished," Bay said as he crossed his arms and pondered over the information that the brothers shared with them. They all stood silent for a few moments, the four younger males all watching Bay, waiting for what he thought would be the best course of action. "Did you happen to get specifics for jumping there, Tay? Say?" Tay smiled wickedly as Say pulled some paper from his pocket and handed it over to their unofficial leader. Baylan panted as he leaned against a tree. Jumping was always tiring, but jumping to a location with such little information... Bang! Bay turned to look just behind him. Lunsen sank into the ground with a loud groan. "I hate jumping," he complained as he leaned against another tree, sweat beading on his forehead. Bay strode over to his companion, helped him out of the snow, and back to his feet. The dark-haired Vargin groaned, but did as he was motioned and stretched. Bang! 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 There was a yelp, following the sound of the jump. Bay jumped forwards towards the younger three just as Say started to tumble off the rocky outcrop that he had jumped to. Bay's fingers just missed Say's shirt, but the lucky male was soon grabbed by 2 other sets of hands. Both Niland and Bekah grabbed hold of their packmate, grinning at the idea of saving RSA. "Thanks," Say said softly as he regained his footing and straightened his shirt. "It's been a while since we've seen snow," Say said as he changed the subject with a bright look to the sky. The rest of the small pack took a look around them, finally getting an idea of where they ended up. A soft chuckle of wonder escaped Niland as he lightly jumped from the rocky outcrop into the ground below. His smile grew as he noticed that he could see his breath forming clouds around his nose. "I haven't seen snow like this ever. We never got snow this thick on the coast," the amber-haired Vargin said as he stepped next to Loonson. Loon glanced at his younger companion, a small smirk on his face. "You never went to the valley, or even the mountains?" he asked. It was not often that they didn't know something about one of their packmates, but once in a while, something like this came up. Tay shook his head. "I did not travel much, like Parker say. I stayed with the pack, with Irti." His eyes were bright and filled with an almost childish wonder as he looked at the snow-covered field in front of them. Loon smiled more and put his arm around Niland's back. "I guess leaving home wasn't all bad," Loon said softly, his voice gentle but encouraging, which made the other members of the pack all smile. They all, at one point or another, wondered and doubted their decisions to leave their home packs, but Loon was right, for once. This was a perk to leaving. A hoarse whinny in the distance made everyone's ears perk up. All eyes shifted back to the stretch of valley just at the foot of the small hill they stood on. There, they could see people, horses, various other races, all milling through what appeared to be pastures in a barn. "Let's not cross through the pastures," Loon said with a nose wrinkle. Balin nodded. "Let's go through the trees. It looks like the tree line almost reaches the town." Bay pointed to a distant tree line just on the other side of what appeared to be the main town. There was little response from the pack. Instead, they all shifted to their feral forms and prepared for the quick trek. Niland and RSA walked through the town, content smiles on their faces. This was their 4th day on the island, and they were enjoying it more than they could express. No one looked at them like they were strange, no one challenged them for ranking, nothing. It was peaceful, and a majority of the citizens were friendly. It was a nice change of pace from what they normally encountered when they first jumped to a new land. "Hey, want to make some excitement?" Say said softly as they walked into the main market of the town. Tay's brows raised as he smiled widely. Excitement was practically their middle names. An evil smile formed on Say's face as he walked a bit further as if nothing was about to happen. Then the smaller brother shoved into Tay. Tay took this as his cue and wheeled on his brother, instantly trying to make a scene. "What's your problem?" he snarled as he stood tall, mock challenging his brother. People instantly started to part away from them, clearing a large space as the brothers started to circle and snarl at each other. "You are my problem!" Say snapped back as he pointed at his brother in an accusing manner. Tay soon stripped his heavier outer jacket and threw it to the side of the cleared space that they now inhabited. People were stopping to watch them, their eyes wide with surprise and interest. "Wanna go? I will take you down, right here!" Niland had to hold back a smile as Say stripped his jacket and pulled out his phone. "It would be my honor," the smaller brother snarled as he clearly clicked at something on his phone and tossed it onto his coat. There was a few moments of silence as the brothers circled, people watching them with intense stares. Suddenly, music started to blast from RSA's phone, and the brothers fell into dancing positions. There were looks of confusion at first from the people that stood watching. But as the music picked up and the brothers fell into a full, intense dance routine, more people started to gather. There were sounds of laughter, oohing and aahing, and a few claps as the brothers moved. The music shifted tone slightly, and Tay dropped to his knees, leaning back, almost flat on the ground as Say flipped over backwards over him. In one smooth motion, Tay was back up on his feet as Say's footing steadied. The two turned and smiled at each other as people gasped, then cheered and clapped for the performing brothers. The song slowly started to fade out, and the brothers turned to the people, bowed politely to the people watching, and started to gather their things. People started to disperse again, most laughing and chattering happily over the show they just witnessed. A few people, mostly younger teens and kids, stepped closer and complimented the brothers. A few even asked if they could learn to dance like that. "I don't know, Say. I think we might need to open up a dance studio here," Niland said as he slipped his jacket back onto his arms. No response. Tay frowned and turned to look at his brother. RSA stood still, his jacket in his hands, sweat beading on his forehead, frown on his face, as if confused, but his ears were perked high while his tail was fluffed up aggressively. "Park or Say?" Niland said as he walked over to see what his brother was watching. Tay's head cocked to the side, and he smiled. Standing on the fountain in the center of the market were two Vargin girls. "Bite my tail, they're Vargin," Tay said as he looked at Say. Say let out a chuckle as he suddenly started moving again. The young male shoved his arms back into his jacket as he approached the two girls, his brother close on his heels. Say slowed to a stop again when he cleared through the people, leaving nothing but empty space between them and the two Vargin females. The smaller of the girls, a blonde with a curled tail, jumped from her perch on the fountain to the ground, glancing at the brothers, but then looked back to her companion with little interest for the males. Not that she was of any interest to Say either. His blue gaze shifted to the dark-haired female that leaned against the back of the fountain, arms crossed on her chest, brows furrowed slightly. Her silvery gaze was on her friend for a moment, but then shifted up. The young male's heart skipped as his gaze met hers, but he pushed it aside and smiled as he pushed his damp hair back out of his face. "Can I help you?" the black-haired Vargin woman said as she pulled the bandana she was wearing off her head to adjust it. Say's eyes jumped to the silver streak in her long hair and the matching ears that perked up out of hiding. "Sorry, you took my breath away," he said smoothly. The blonde woman let out a snickering sound, which drew Say's attention. She stood a few feet away, hand covering her mouth as she watched him. When she caught him looking at her, she shook her head and looked away, laughing even harder. Thump! Say jumped and turned to face the dark-haired woman, only to find her on the ground in front of him, standing there and inspecting him. Here, I thought you were just exhausted from running through my mind." Her eyes were narrow, a sly smile on her face as she looked Say up and down. RSA's mouth opened, but he suddenly became flustered. "What? Cat got your tongue?" the woman asked as she circled around Say, then gave Tay a quick wink. Tay bit his lip, trying not to laugh at his brother's sudden lack of words. "I'm jealous. I thought I was going to have that honor," the young woman continued as she finished her circle around Say and walked towards her friend. Say tried to find words, but his mind was empty. Why couldn't he find words? "Come on, Allie. Brother will be waiting for us," the blonde girl said warmly as she grabbed hold of her companion's arm. The black-haired woman looked down at her, smiled, and nodded before glancing back up at the brothers. She offered one more smile, a wink, then turned and wandered off with her blonde friend. A few moments passed before Say turned to his brother and dramatically fell to his knees while growling. Tay instantly started laughing, his face turning red as tears formed in his eyes. Talon grabbed RSA under the arms, pulled him back to his feet, and brushed him off, and started to walk away. They would discuss this later, when the rest of the pack could hear about it. "Slow down, RSA," Lunson grumbled as the bachelors all walked together through town. They were on a mission of finding food, but it was clear that Say had other ideas. "Even if you find her, you won't talk to her," Makota said as he took a few larger strides to catch up to Say. Say glanced at the youngest bachelor, but rolled his eyes. What did he know? Nothing. "I'm telling you, Mama, they looked familiar. They both did," Talon said to Balin as they walked. Balin had heard this multiple times in the last few days, but didn't know what to make of the situation until they saw these girls. It was a normal thing to have to deal with flirtatious, mildly smitten RSA, but to have Talon even encouraging to find these girls was a bit different. "Riska!" A voice called over the market. RSA's ears perked up, making everyone else do the same. Riska. Balin knew that name. He pushed past the other members and stood on his toes, looking over people until he found the form of a small Vargin woman standing on the steps of a shop, clearly looking for someone else. "Riska Vixentail," he muttered as a small smile started to form on his soft face. "Wait, the Fury girl." Lunson's voice suddenly sounded more interested. Talon turned to his friend, frowning. "You know her?" Loon nodded slightly. "Her eldest brother was bonded to an Omega girl I grew up with. The other brother was a Skalat. What would she be doing here?" He looked over to Balin, confused. Bay shook his head, smiling more. "Hell if I know, but it's a familiar face." Bay led the small group through the crowded streets towards the shop that Riska waited at. Finally, when they pushed through, Riska looked at them, a little shocked looking. Her eyes went over every one of them, but then stopped on Tay and Say. A wicked smile formed on her youthful face. "Hey, you're the bastard that was flirting with, Alicia." She bit her lip as she hesitated, but then finished her statement with a teasing smile. Say pursed, then licked his lips in visible frustration and determination. Talon put his arm around his brother's shoulders, chuckling. "Alicia, hey, Say, you got her name finally." Talon lightly shook his brother, but RSA didn't make a sound. "Riska, do you remember me?" Balin finally pushed the two brothers back and looked at Riska with stern eyes. The small blonde looked at Bay, clearly shocked by the usage of her name. Her golden eyes were narrow and sharp for many moments, but then slowly started to soften. Master Balin!" She almost squeaked out. Balin smiled and nodded. "Bless the stars," he responded happily. Riska suddenly became a flurry of excitement. She bounded from her perch on the steps and embraced the taller male in a friendly hug. "I can't believe you are here, alive, and looking good." Riska's curled tail wagged a mile a minute as she looked at the older Vargin. "I'm surprised to see you here, too. Last I saw you, you were training to become a healer." Riska snorted, shook her head. "Why would I stay there?" Balin had no response for that question. He couldn't see reasons to stay there, other than family. The small Vargin woman held up a finger. "I want you to see somebody, if I can find her," she said as she bounced back up to the stairs, climbed back onto the railing. "Why is she so little?" Moki asked in a whisper as he leaned closer to Balin. "Makota!" Bay scolded softly. Moki wrinkled his nose and stood tall again. The bachelors watched Riska for a few minutes before she got excited again, jumped from her perch, and motioned for them to follow her. The boys all hesitated, looking at each other in question, before Balin finally stopped forward to follow the little female. "Allie! I found some pests wandering town." They could hear Riska's voice despite the fact they could no longer see her as she weaved through people. Pests? I don't want any pests. I already have Mitz and Dason to look after, not to mention your brother. The second voice was familiar to Balin. Finally, they pushed through the people and walked up to the steps in a small gazebo where another female Vargin sat in a hanging bench swing with a guitar. Balin froze. He felt everything go numb as he looked at the familiar face. Slowly, Alicia's eyes rose from her guitar and glazed over each of the boys, but stopped on Balin. Her head slowly rose up, and the look of shock and sorrow formed on her face. "Bay?" she asked as she put the guitar gently down. All of the bachelors looked at Balin as he stepped forward quickly and practically fell to his knees in front of Alicia, his forehead pressed onto one of her knees. Alicia jolted slightly, shocked at his sudden movements, but also the sudden respect from someone she hadn't seen in almost 12 years. Gently, she placed her hand on his head and ran her fingers through his copper hair. "What are you doing here, dumbass?" she asked softly, her voice sweet. Bay looked up at her, shocked at first, but then laughed. I'm not your superior anymore, my friend," she said as she stood up from her seat. Balin hesitated, but then soon stood as well. Alicia smiled as she leaned against their large table, her fingers aimlessly tracing along the rim of her glass. The bar was fairly quiet this time of day, but it was still warm, comfortable, which helped keep her calm and collected as she caught up with Balin and his little group. She didn't know most of his little group, but a few of them she had seen in passing before she had been banished. Still, it was nice to catch up with your own kind. The sound of a small group of women grabbed their attentions. 2 human women, a Khajiit, and an elf. Normal group for Fayley, but the boys were clearly interested, maybe a little confused. The small group of women paused in the entryway, clearly eyeing the Vargin boys. Alicia snickered to herself as she watched the boys, wondering how they would handle the type of attention, and if her little admirer from the other day would be any more impressive. Slowly, the women walked by, making sure to walk with just enough hip sway, with just enough skin showing. Alicia rolled her eyes, but smiled more as she noticed each of the boys inspecting the women. Her own eyes landed on Say, and her smile dropped a bit as she grew curious. "What was your name again, Aralan?" Taylin and Moki shot Say a look as he pulled his gaze off the passing women and back to Alicia. Arase," he said in an almost suspicious tone. Alicia nodded once and turned her attention away again, leaving Say watching her, trying to figure out the game. Lunson stood after much socializing. "You'll have to excuse me," he said with a slight bow to Alicia. "You going back to the inn?" Talon asked as he twisted to look at his companion. Loon stopped and nodded. "All right, I will come too." He stood up, offered a small bow to Alicia. "I hope we get more time to talk, Miss Alicia," Tay said warmly, his Skalat voice making an appearance. Alicia smiled at him and nodded. The 4 watched Tay and Loon leave the bar in silence. "They are close," Alicia said matter-of-factly. Bay snorted as Say snickered and nodded. Slowly, the bar started to fill more, a sure sign of the day coming closer to an end. Alicia smiled as she stood up and motioned for the 3 boys to hang out for a moment. The 3 boys watched her, but Bay turned to Say, "Did you really try to flirt with her the other day?" Say was a bit surprised at first, but then smiled guiltily. "Maybe." Moki laughed loudly as Balin rolled his eyes, exasperated, but then smiled at Say and patted the back of his head. "Good luck with that one, Say." "What is that supposed to mean?" Say asked, the look of slight panic on his face. Balin smiled and sighed as he took a bite from the cheese and bread plate they had ordered. "Just good luck." RSA was about to push Baylin for more information when Alicia returned, her arms loaded with drinks. "My treat, boys," she crooned out as she put the drinks down one by one. Moki's eyes lit up as he snatched a drink. "Only one, Makota." Baylin growled to the youngest Vargin. Alicia smiled warmly at Moki, then looked at Say, her eyes narrowing slightly. They were on to their third round of drinks when the small group of women that had passed earlier in the night decided to walk by again. "One for each of us," Moki muttered softly between Bay and Say. "There's 4 of them. There's 3 of us," Say said softly as he shot Moki a glance. Moki shrugged with a small frown. "Lady Alicia can't be left out, can she?" Moki let out a snort as Baylin smacked him on the back of the head, but Alicia sat with her hand covering her mouth, laughing. Alicia's amusement vanished as she noticed one of the human women getting closer to the boys. Her face fell still as she watched the brunette woman walk by and give a soft hello to the 3. "Hey," Say crooned out as the other 2 just watched her, interested and amused. She wasn't too sure how she felt about her admirer admiring another woman before she had her fill of fun. Sure, she teased Mitz and had some fun with him, but there was forever that strange awkwardness due to being a general and soldier together. This? She let out a soft growl as she slid from her bar stool and fluffed up her own hair. She pulled her overshirt over her head, exposing her red tank, as well as all of her scars. Baylin was the first to shift his attention to her again, and did a double take. Alicia noticed, but ignored him. Her silvery eyes were locked on another game. "Here, I thought Cat really did have your tongue," Alicia said smoothly as she leaned against RSA's chair. Say's face grew warm and pink as he tried not to look at her, but instead kept his eyes wandering from woman to woman at the bar. Alicia tried her best to follow his eyes, smiling ever so slightly. "That one works at the strip club on Gaia," she said as she pointed out each of the women she knew Say was glancing at. "She's a farmer's daughter, but she likes to sit at the stables with the boys and take care of the horses." The corner of Say's mouth twitched as he tried not to smile. "That one is actually a man known as Loredell. Good man, uncle of a friend of mine." There was a slight sound from Say, but he quickly regained his composure and kept looking anywhere but at the little dark-haired woman that was trying to torment him. Alicia glanced at Bay, who was trying his damnedest not to laugh. When he noticed her looking at him, he mouthed, "Go for it," to her, and winked. Alicia's brows raised as she took the approval to torment the young man. Allie took another quick drink before walking around Say's chair and smoothly slipped herself into his lap before he could react. "Is this seat taken?" she asked as she sat sideways with her arm draped up and over the silver-haired man's shoulders. She could feel RSA tense under her and could see his cheeks going more red. He gently and slowly leaned back in his seat, trying to get enough distance to regain some confidence. But Alicia learned with him. "Lady Alicia, what is your job here on the island?" Makota asked through his chuckles. Alicia smiled at the youngest Vargin as she leaned her side up against RSA's chest more. "Nothing, to be honest. I occasionally help with combat training or horse training, but I can't do too much right now." She could feel RSA's chest vibrate as he shuddered with his nerves. "Why can't you?" Bay asked, his voice holding true curiosity. Alicia hesitated. I got into a fight that left me pretty beat up," she said finally. "It was only a little fib, right?" RSA looked at Alicia out of the corner of his eyes and instantly felt his face go warmer. What was happening? How did it come to this? What did he do to get to this point? He had flirted and bantered with women before, maybe a little poorly, but he had before, and never had it ever gone this way before. Alicia adjusted her seating again and got more comfortable with her shoulder resting against his chest. though she still talked with Moki and Bay as if there was nothing else happening. Suddenly, Alicia leaned a bit and looked him in the face. "You're warm and smell nice," she said simply. Say managed to make some sound, but couldn't get any further. Alicia smiled, lightly pushed her fingers into his lips. "You need some practice," she teased softly as she slid off his lap and turned to face the guys. "I will happily teach you someday, Arlan." She winked at him as she got her jacket again. "But I'm off to bed." "Sounds like a good plan, Miss Alicia," Balin said as Moki let out a yawn. Alicia nodded and turned to walk off. "Too bad. I have enough room for two to play," she whispered into Arasay's ear as she passed. Say's breath caught, and he was soon hacking after inhaling his own spit.